session, we're going to be talking about data in the age of Gen AI. And I'm from Accenture, where we've done over 700 generative AI implementations at the end of last year. Since then, we've done over 1,000. So we have some special opportunity, given the work that we do, in that we get to see a lot more of the opportunities and the mistakes. And I wanted to share in this talk 6 things we need to know about data readiness in the age of Gen AI. So let's just get right into it. Let's talk about number 1. So number 1 is your proprietary data is your competitive advantage. Within the data space, we've been thinking about data products, right? Treating data as a product just like you would have any other product within the company. And that remains to be something that is very important, because without your own data that is trusted and that is safe, you won't be able to add any relevancy around your business. So information and data about your people, your processes, your real products. Can you give me a thumbs up if you could hear? Okay, good. Thank you. So thinking about data as a product is really the key part. So I know within our industry, we've been thinking about data products for years now. But that the term data products and data mesh, it's been somewhat more of a data term, right? Something that us data geeks talk about. What's really different now is that generative AI has made data and thinking about data products as something that every board and every CEO, every C-suite is probably asking you about. Do we have data about our company to be data-driven? Do we have good data to be able to drive AI? Because suddenly every company has aspirations to be an AI company. And it's really, really hard to do that without data, right? These open pre-trained models, that's using internet data. It's not going to have anything specific about your company. So to bring in that relevancy, start with data products. So we know that to be true. Let's talk about number 2. Number 2 is unstructured data. So this is things like videos, voice, text, code. Every data organization has been built around structured data, tabular data, analytic records, dashboards. We've gotten so good at being able to have a data supply chain to capture, curate, and consume structured data. A lot of our protections, access control, data quality, governance, a lot of that's been built around structured data. Unstructured data we know is so much easier to use and so much more important in the age of generative AI. Let me give you an example. In last week, Accenture joined Fortune to close the New York Stock Exchange. We rang the closing bell. And we worked with Fortune to take all their editorial data. They have 100,000 plus articles, 20,000 plus video blogs, and you can bet these unstructured data, the videos and the articles, those are treated literally like products, right? Fortune magazine, probably they report upon the Fortune 500, probably many of your clients, your companies, as well as mine, right? That is unstructured data, and that is treated literally through an editorial process as products. They were able to monetize that data into building a custom LLM that enables us to ask questions when we were doing market research about the Fortune 500, just like you might be able to read the articles. Even before creating an LLM, right, being able to summarize the articles and really get back what we need. So the unstructured data is really key. Have you thought about taking the unstructured data and treating them like data products, just like we have our structured data? And that's something as an industry we need to think about. So what's the equivalent to the capture, curate, consume? There's a lot of attention given to vector databases. That's a really important part. I would think that's consumption, right? Your vector DB is going to get very, very expensive if you scale it all across. Very likely too much similarity, right? So very much a consumption type of data product for serving similar data for a particular generative AI-enabled application. What is the equivalent of your data supply chain? So rethinking your governance, your architecture, your quality, your masking, all of this within unstructured data, number 2. Number 3, synthetic data. Synthetic data is really key to filling in gaps in your data. So, these AI has always been very, very data hungry, right? You've always needed to have lots of data to be able to create AI. And even with generative AI, it's more so. You don't just need to have data, you really have to have data that is good quality data that represents the scenario at hand. Well, we talked about being at your competitive advantage. How do you get that data to begin with? So looking at synthetic data is a really key opportunity. Many companies already have digital twins. Think about using the digital twin as a source of synthetic data. One idea is to, when you're using a large language model and you want to fine tune, you're going to need at least 1,000, possibly more, really good quality data to be able to fine tune that LLM. So here's a trick. You could use generative AI to create synthetic data, in this case for fine tuning. What you might do is you might use a 13 billion parameter or OpenAI, a large model, to create and work with a domain expert to generate synthetic data that models the space, right? The domain expert is so important here to be able to model the scenario of the space. And then that becomes your fine-tuning data that has enough information to then fine-tune a smaller large language model. Let's take a 7 billion parameter model. And then you could achieve with that fine-tuning the same accuracy that you could with the 13 billion or the larger parameter model, and you have a lower cost model or something that could run even on the edge and on a device, right? So thinking about synthetic data as another unique data product, that's not something that we've thought about as much within the data space. Let me give you number 4. So number 4 is generative AI. It just makes it easier to use data for your own purposes. So we know as data practitioners that data has been traditionally very siloed, whether it's within systems, whether it's in domains within the business. And that's just because it's been really hard to be able to access for your own purpose, right? It sometimes takes a whole nother project where you first have to get access to the system, then you're gonna have to interview somebody. You might actually do something to create a new insight or a new view. And then if that person leaves the company, then you kind of are stuck. Throughout all that process, you needed somebody who really understood the technology, right? You needed a data scientist, a data engineer. With generative AI, the ability to summarize, whether it's unstructured data or to be able to map structured data to the use case at hand. And so what we need to look at here is your semantic layer. The semantic layer that describes the context of the business, right? So remember, with number 1, we already have data products. So part of this is solved by being able to publish data products, whether they're structured, unstructured, synthetic, unconventional, IoT, real-time streaming. Like publishing the structured and the unstructured and all these types of data products is one part. The other part, just like when we do internet search, many of you look about the same age as I am, where you might have done internet search before knowledge graphs, where when internet search was coming out, we had these links that we had to then click into to really understand any sort of detail, right? If I wanted to search for Accenture, Accenture has an office right in the Salesforce building, but today's knowledge graph would give you a map of this local San Francisco office and possibly an estimate of an Uber ride to get there, because it's giving the context that if you're searching for Accenture, you probably want to go. This knowledge graph is that context. Company has a place, Accenture's a company. You as a person probably want to go to the place, so this is what you need to see. In the same way, the semantic layer is really key to make sure you could use data for your own purposes. So, as an example, I've had our chief marketing officer talk to me about, as a marketing person, part of their job and their new job is acting as a domain coach. And their job is to go configure the semantic layer. I never thought I'd hear our marketing lead say that, but that's so important because if you think about how we write articles and how we want to represent the voice of Accenture, the things that is really important, an article for our internal employees versus articles that might be for a client or for market facing, the voice of Accenture, the details that you see, that is exactly what the semantic layer would be able to describe. Just like when you're searching for Accenture in something like Google and Bing, the ability to contextualize that you probably want to go to the office that's closest to us, not to our headquarters in Dublin or somewhere in Chicago, right? You probably want to go here because that's where you are. So this semantic layer is really, really key. I'll give you one example in this one. So BMW, they have published and they started using generative AI within their IT and service desk. So some of their code, reverse engineering COBOL code, looking at tickets around their applications. There's over 13 million configurations that you can make in a BMW. Not all of those are possible to order, right? Those just are permutations, and there's certain things that you can actually order based off of the type of the BM car and the status of the supply chain, what the order system says. You can bet that the code is actually a source of truth. That's the real order you can take. So in addition to using that code for the IT department, which they were able to save and move from 6 hours of work to 35 minutes, they were able to use that data as a unique source of data for their customer service and their dealers. So when you now go into a BMW dealer, that BMW dealer is asking questions about, can you configure that third row seat of an SUV with the seatbelt configuration? Yes or no? Some of that data is now being served through, again, from their code. So the semantic layer is really important. The semantic layer that says, when I'm the dealer, I don't actually care about the service desk tickets or the code. I need to know, can I configure that third row seat? Versus if I'm IT and I'm doing customer support, then I might want to see other things about the system. Same with service. If I'm doing service on the BMW, I need to be able to see exactly what I need to know about that service for that specific vehicle. So all of this is, again, rethinking about how you use, in this case, we have unstructured data coming from the code, some semi-structured data coming from the service desk and tickets, being able to contextualize to use across the business using the semantic layer. So number 5. So generative AI, it accelerates data risk. So I said a lot of things about changing with the data itself, right? Changes in terms of synthetic data and structured data. It's making it easier to use. The flip side of making it easier to use, it's accelerating risks. Pretty much, again, any company is now sort of an AI startup. Any engineer who can download open source now uses LangChain and is an expert. So, I can bet that Samsung engineer who used ChatGPT to be able to generate code, he or she was like a superstar for 2 weeks, right? Until they saw the data leakage. And again, this is because it's so easy to use, right? Samsung's a big company. OpenAI, ChatGPT, that is one of the leaders in the field. If they have that risk, you could bet others also have a similar risk. So thinking about generative AI, not just from a responsible AI perspective, but from a responsible data. So even if you're not building your own LLMs, you're likely not. Most companies haven't started. As long as you are using someone else's LLM-powered full-stack application, you need to be able to ask, right? And to be able to control your responsible data use. I'll give you something that's a bit more scary. Lastly, I was also at Snowflake Summit, but also at a confidential compute summit. Confidential computing is a new technology that we all should have in our radar. It is a systematic, programmatic way to do compute where your data stays encrypted. Typically, data is encrypted at rest when it's stored and in motion when it's transit. When you have to compute, you have to decrypt it. Why is this important? Because LLMs make it easier to break some of the differential privacy and the masking of data that we've traditionally used as an industry to keep some of our data safe. If you're using some of these traditional data masking or differential privacy type computations, generative AI's power means that it can find and do all the cool things that I just mentioned, finding new patterns. And so being able to now use that to reverse engineer some of that data you were trying to mask to keep private or to keep sensitive is something that's risk. But the good news is that with these confidential compute capabilities, you could procure the instance just like anything else in the cloud. There's lots of hardware that I could buy. It's a special chip. So just like I might pick an EC2 instance of a particular size and memory, I could pick the one that has the secure enclave that allows me now to run my data in an encrypted fashion. The other really important way to think about this is when you're using a managed model. I mentioned your data is at risk. anytime you're using that managed model, you need to think about the prompt and the data that's going into it. So thinking about being able to have a gateway or switchboard that is collecting the prompts, looking for some of that PII or the IP to be able to strip it out, and then to send just the LLM, something that has a tokenized view, like it might just say employee, doesn't need to know it's talking about Teresa, right? And then we get the response back and we reinsert it. So again, thinking about your data risks and having some of these new capabilities, one, just from a policy perspective, but using some of these new tools to keep us safe. The last thing I think is really exciting. So just like every industry, we're being disrupted with generative AI, right? So you could use generative AI applied to what we do within data to jumpstart our data readiness. So anytime we were doing many dashboards, right? I love a good dashboard, but that's the key, a good dashboard. Very few dashboards have been thought of to be good, and there's probably a lot of one-offs and things that might not be so good. So instead, keep the good dashboard, but also use generative AI to think about having a more multimodal, right? It could be voice, it could be generating the image right when you need it, or the chart. Being able to have more of an interactive newspaper could be one thing. I mentioned the difference between structured data and using more unstructured data. So does everything have to go through a structured data capability? Could I also use generative AI to be able to help me create my data products, to document my data products, to generate my semantic layer, right? It might be just interviewing one of these domain coaches, somebody who really knows the domain well, and to be able to go from voice to text and be able to pull out some of that ontology, pull out some of that data product description. So in that spirit, we have mapped, again, just because we could see a lot more projects, we mapped, and there's about 42 of these generative AI interventions, things that we have tried using generative AI to be able to augment and get us faster on our data readiness journey. So you could imagine migration modernization. If you have an older system, being able to use generative AI to be able to, one, see what's the data there, see what reports and uses are people doing. Use that to get your initial data product descriptions. As you're creating data products, to be able to do the mapping, get your metadata tagging to help you create the pipelines and generate the code that publishes it, right? So being able to take these and to invest in them to be able to build up our readiness and get there faster. So with that said, these are the 6 things that we see that are new. If you have any questions, I think I have 2 minutes. I could probably take one question, but thank you so much for joining.